Alrighty, welcome to episode 3 of the Film Illiterates podcast. Today I'm here, Joe from filmilliterates.com, and I'm joined with, as always, Nate Stone.
Hey guys, how's it going?
And Alex Patton.
Hey everyone.
Hey Alex, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing terrible.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Why don't you tell us about it, Joe?
I would love to tell you all about it, but that would take a whole other podcast to get into it.
Oh, okay. We'll save Joe's therapy session for later, for another episode.
So today, it's a beautiful, beautiful weekday on whatever day that this came out. We're recording this on Tuesday, May 24th. Hey guys, The Nice Guys came out last week. Did y'all get to go see it?
Yeah, that to be honest, it was a fun movie.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, to be honest, I really do like Shane Black's writing, and this is just some of his good stuff, what he's good at.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. How about you, Alex? Did you get to go see it?
Haven't had the chance to yet, but I mean, definitely looking forward to it though. It looks pretty great.
Yeah. Well, in celebration of Shane Black's return to the buddy cop film, we decided to make today's conversation about buddy cop films. We'll be talking about kind of the evolution of buddy cop movies, how they've changed since they became mainstream, and where we get today's modern conception of the buddy cop movie. But before we get to that, we're going to have a little conversation about what we've watched recently, because we're cinephiles and we can't stop and we have problems.
Yes, we do. So like I said, we still have our charity fund, so if you guys please donate, we can help Joe get through this together. That's why we have this buddy system,
Or just take away all my movies, because that way I won't have a way of watching anything, and maybe my problem will stop.
So somebody
you can
hack.
just give them to me. You can just give them to me. I'll take them. I'll take them off your hands, man. Like, no worries.
Yeah, and somebody please hack into Joe's Netflix account, so that way he can't watch anymore.
Anyway, with that, let's go to you, Alex. What have you watched recently, and tell us why?
Well, I actually finally got around to watching Deadpool.
Finally.
Finally. I know. Well, I missed it in theaters, and then for the longest time, you could only buy it online. You couldn't rent it or anything like that. But anyway, finally got around to it. I really loved it. It was what I was hoping it would be. Yeah, honestly, it's my kind of superhero movie. I'm not big into many of the Marvel movies and whatnot, all the Avengers and the separate superhero films and all. Those have been I've always thought them to be okay. There are moments where they're a little bit better, other moments in the series, but to be honest, they've not been my favorite films. But Deadpool was one that I really enjoyed, just because it was so blatantly different than the rest of the Marvel films, and I think that worked incredibly well for it.
Yeah, I love Deadpool. I actually saw it twice in theaters, and both times I saw it at a movie theater that served alcohol as well. So that was the prime.
It's the ultimate experience. Yeah.
To watch Deadpool in, and it's fantastic. The best review I can give for the movie is that it's the 21 Jump Street of superhero movies. I absolutely love Deadpool.
Yeah, I'll have to kind of I know it's already too early to kind of say best movies of 2016 already, but so far it's probably it's getting close to my number one. To be honest, I've never had such a great experience so far with seeing a movie like that.
As of right now, it's number 2 or number 3 on my list right now. Mm-hmm. But we'll see how that is when we get more into the Oscar movies later on this year.
Yeah, that's true. We still have a full half of a year.
Yeah. So besides Deadpool, which I think is one of the most entertaining films I've seen in a long while, I did rewatch again. Just it's one of my favorite movies by now. But it's I rewatched It's Such a Beautiful Day.
I've never
fantastic. The narration. Go ahead.
I've never heard of this movie. Can you give a brief synopsis about it?
To give a brief synopsis about this movie, it's kind of hard to do. Well, the animation isn't like anything you'd see in like Pixar or DreamWorks, whatever. It's all just like hand drawn like stick figures and whatnot. But the
Well,
movie's
it's a
about
Don Hertzfeldt movie.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
yeah.
Gotcha.
So yeah, he also did recently The World of Tomorrow,
Yeah.
which I thought was great as well. But
Hmm.
this movie's a little bit longer, I think, and I think it's better. But
Okay.
yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites, man.
I actually like The World of Tomorrow better than It's Such a Beautiful Day, but both of them are definitely worth checking out. Don Hertzfeldt has a wonderful animation style and kind of a cynical, deliciously deliciously cynical view of the world, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. And to be
Yeah,
honest,
yeah.
he also was responsible for the recent Pop Tarts ads. That was his pen in that.
Oh, I didn't know that. It doesn't
Yeah.
surprise me though.
Oh.
Hmm.
So Nathan, what have you watched lately?
So yeah, recently, kind of like in preparation, let's see, for this, I kind of have watched quite a few buddy cop films. Some of them include 48 Hours, Lethal Weapon, but most recently, the one I really enjoyed was Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. I revisited that one. That was another Shane Black film, and actually, what I really love about this one is that it's kind of like the comeback movie for Robert Downey Jr. before he became Tony Stark, and I keep forgetting just how great he is in that movie, and just how great the writing is as well. I mean, every scene of it, I'm kind of laughing my ass off just because it's Shane Black just writing these great characters, and you're just finding it very entertaining all the way through. Um, Another movie I saw was also Iron Man 3.
Which also
Also
starred Robert Downey Jr.
yeah, and
Yeah.
written and directed by Shane Black. Now, a lot of people give this movie a lot of flack because of how a lot of fanboys say this movie botched up, the Mandarin, fandom in the Marvel comics. But to be honest, I still think Shane Black did something really cool with it. He kind of just made it his own thing, and I could tell the actors were having fun while they're doing it. And to be honest, I still love it. It's a fun movie, regardless of what all those Marvel diehard fans say. It's still a movie like it makes me laugh.
We could certainly make a whole episode just based on Iron Man 3 and our opinions of Iron Man 3 because
Oh yeah,
that whole Mandarin thing, I think that for the character and how he's used in the comics, now not having read the comics, I can't speak to this as well, but for the character, it might not have been the best choice. But as a movie plot point, I felt like it was brilliant, and I felt like it was the best use of Ben Kingsley I've seen in a really long time. So
yeah.
I really appreciated it, even if it did give way to kind of a little bit more of a lackluster third act. I think as a storytelling arc, it worked a lot better than a lot of people give it credit for. But that's just one man's opinion.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Shane Black's always been really a master of, I think, is just kind of playing off of people's expectations of the genre. And regardless if it's a buddy cop film, a detective, or a crime movie, or even a superhero movie, he knows how to play with that. But other than that, the other film I saw that I kind of actually, I'm surprised I waited this long to see it, was the Steve Jobs movie that came out last year with Michael Fassbender, Kate Winslet. It was the one that was written by Aaron Sorkin, who is known for doing The Social Network.
Mhm.
And to be honest, I always thought it was very intriguing. What made this different compared to like other biopics is that it's not really a biopic. It feels like it's a play on the screen because it's broken up into 3 points in the Steve Jobs' life. 3 moments
Yeah.
of when he kind of like had a release of a new computer. It takes place in 1984, 1988, and 1998, but it all takes place backstage. It never is actually focused on the actual release launch and him presenting on stage. It's all about what happens behind the scenes. And I thought it was actually done very well. I mean, it's not probably the best movie out there, but it was definitely unique.
I still haven't seen the Steve Jobs movie, but I've heard, especially from Nick, who is a contributor to the Film Literates website, that it's a very good movie and I need to check it out. So I'll probably end up seeing it with both his review and your review now. I'll probably have to get around to that someday.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nick and I actually we both saw it together when it came out in theaters a while back. But I was kind of blown away by how much I liked it, how good it was. Because
Mhm.
the movie is just like Nate, you're saying, it's just the three scenes. There are a little bit of flashbacks in between, but like
Mhm.
other than that, there's not really much else. And the fact that it builds so much, like so much tension, so much passion into those three scenes that span the entire movie, I think that's just incredible.
Mhm.
The performances, of course, was what stand out the most. I mean, Fassbender is incredible as Jobs, and then I actually really like Seth Rogen as Wozniak.
Mhm.
I think he
Yeah,
does
it's
incredible, and especially when they get into like that shouting match that they had near the end.
mhm.
That was great part of
Yeah.
the movie.
And kind of thinking actually on this movie, as a script, it's it's Aaron Sorkin. It's going to be penned wonderfully, but it is really just
Yes.
these people just like having dialogue sessions with each other. But I think Danny Boyle, who's the
Hmm.
director of this, he's known for doing Slumdog Millionaire, 127 Hours. He just brings this very interesting visual component to the whole thing, and I think without that, this movie just wouldn't have been what it was, and so that was cool as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got a perfect matchup. It's got incredibly well written script. Very, it's like incredibly well directed, and then like I said, performances are off the charts.
Yeah,
So yeah, Joe, get around to seeing that.
yeah,
I will definitely. So then to round that out, I've watched a few movies lately, other than the ones we're going to be talking about later on. I've been working through the books of Edgar Rice Burroughs, and if you don't know who that is the author of the John Carter of Mars series, which I've been watching or reading recently, and the Tarzan book series. He's the guy who created them. So I recently read the very first Tarzan book, Tarzan of the Apes, and then I rewatched the Disney Tarzan movie.
Nice.
which
All right.
which the first time I watched that, I didn't grow up with that one. That's one I didn't watch till I was in college, and I enjoyed it and
Oh,
all. But,
yeah.
but watching that after reading the book, I felt like Disney did a really good job of adapting the book for kids because the book is not a very kid friendly book. There's Tarzan smashing ape heads in and breaking bones everywhere, and people are
That
dying, and
Well,
there's
that's family appropriate. That's kids love
there
that
is
stuff.
there is
of
a
course.
lot because the book was written in the early 1900s. There's a lot of casual racism going on, which they
Jeez.
wisely decided to keep out of the movie. But as just kind of an adaptation, I think it works. I think it works really well.
Mhm.
I do think it's interesting. I guess spoiler alert for the book. If you guys haven't read the book from the early 1900s, Tarzan does not get together with Jane at the end of the book, which really surprised me considering that that's kind of the stereotype of one of the great couples of literature and movie history is Tarzan and Jane. Whether or not they do in the sequel books, I don't know yet, but it was just kind of interesting watching the movie and their whole romance going on. And I read the book, and it's just kind of a very sober ending, not really a downer ending, but it's a much more mature ending, which is kind of interesting. So
Hmm.
there
Hmm.
was that. And Disney Tarzan is fun. It's fun and fine. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other film, recently I actually picked up a copy of the original Star Wars Episode 4, and I picked up a copy of The Empire Strikes Back because I saw them both at a used bookstore, and it was the limited edition that
Oh.
included the theatrical release of the films. So I
Hmm.
decided, why not? I don't have a theatrical edition, so that'll be fun. And I rewatched them both. And watching it knowing that there is none of the added effects in or any of the other crap that George Lucas shoved in from the mid 90s on, one of the most interesting things I found was how heavily inspired the designs of everything was to the 70s and the 80s. I mean, obviously they're products of the 70s and the 80s,
Mhm.
but every set, every creature, every costume, every robot looks like it could come straight off of the the cover of a 70s pulp sci-fi novel. Like I feel like I walked through bookstores and just seen, oh, you could take this screenshot right here and just put it on some novel where the author's name is bigger than the title.
Mhm.
It's just very very cool to watch, and I never really noticed that before. Just how ingrained in those 2 decades those films really are. Just
Mhm.
aside from being great
Uh-huh.
pieces of fiction and great pieces of art, they're just really, really well done sci-fi fantasies that you don't see creative fantastic designs like that anymore. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and interesting you point that out. I mean, even though the movie was made, in the 70s, it's still like to this day a hallmark in just like any kind of like sci-fi. Like it's something that even today it's not dated. It still doesn't feel dated. It's still something relevant and still present in our culture today. And I think for some reason that's not just copying a time period. It's something it was thinking way before its time. And I think that's what's so fantastic about just the movies as well, is that it was way before anything that was being done at the time.
Yeah, it's certainly heavily influenced the films for years to come after that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that wraps up our what we've watched segment. Now let's go into our main topic of conversation. So, Nice Guys came out, returned to the buddy cop films. It's the first big buddy cop movie I think that people have really thought about in a while. We've had plenty over the years, but this is kind of the first one where people have thought, oh, this is a buddy cop movie because partially it's Shane Black is behind the wheel again, and he's a pro at this genre of film, and the movie is set in the 70s. So we decided to go back and we've picked 3 movies in the buddy cop genre, and we're gonna try to compare them one by one and kind of look at them and see what they did differently and what they have done for the buddy cop genre. But before we get to our first movie, which is going to be 48 Hours, Nate, do you have a couple of examples of films that are kind of the precursor to what we know as the modern or the 70s and 80s buddy cop film?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like you kind of think about it, it's really like a buddy movie if you think about it, like the actual buddy cop genre. It's just, you're taking 2 different genres, like film noir, a detective story, and then putting like a buddy genre to it. So it's kind of something that, I think ever since the golden era of Hollywood, it's existed. But if you're talking like are you talking about, Joe, of like where this idea of combining them kind of came from?
Well, I'm talking about more just buddy films in general, because buddy films have been around for a while. I know Akira Kurosawa has dabbled in that before.
Yes, and actually I can talk about that. So, one of the earlier examples of the buddy cop genre comes from Akira Kurosawa, who made this film back in 1949 called Stray Dog. It's kind of pretty similar to what we all know buddy cops of today, which is like, 2 different characters. Both of them are opposites of each other and how they view the law or how they view on getting the job done. One's more orthodox and, by the book, and the other one is kind of more unconventional, but he knows a lot more about the world. He's a bit more worldly. He understands how people and how society works. So, and that in a way causes tension for them, and that's how it becomes kind of like a relationship thing. In this one, I kind of did some research on it. It's kind of it is a bit of a buddy cop genre, but it's a bit more about the young rookie detective's story as he's trying to basically be a textbook, detective, but realizing he can't be because not every criminal is evil. He realizes that I think at one point even he could have become a criminal, and him having that revelation changes his focus of the whole crime investigation. So it was a very interesting film, and it's Akira Kurosawa. He's visually brilliant. He was a genius of his time, but it's kind of, this movie is kind of where it first came to life that having 2 guys solving a crime together and seeing the chemistry between those 2 is kind of where it all started in a way.
Yeah. And of course over the years the buddy comedy has been around for quite a while. The most blatant example I can think of that are some of the comedy duos of the 40s and the 50s, and then you go and then you have The Odd Couple obviously later on, but then the buddy cop film. I think what a lot of people think of the very first buddy cop film is when you get to 48 Hours, which stars Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy.
A very young Eddie Murphy at the time.
Very young Eddie Murphy. This is his first film role, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
His real big breakout role, from my understanding. Like, he had done like his Delirious stand-up comedian act, but before then, I don't think anyone had heard of him or seen him on the screen. This was his real big screen debut, I'd have to say.
And I think it's interesting that this movie is considered kind of the father of 80s buddy cop films because Eddie Murphy isn't a cop in this movie. He's actually a criminal
Yeah.
that's paired up
Yeah.
with a cop.
Yep.
Exactly.
And another really interesting thing about the buddy cop genre is that a lot of people think of the humor in buddy cop films. I feel like I'm gonna get really sick of saying the word buddy cop during this podcast. By the way,
Yeah, probably.
but a hallmark of the genre has been the humor, and so I went into this film expecting a comedy, but this really isn't a comedy. It's more of it's more of a grounded crime thriller that has more in common with Dirty Harry than later buddy cop films, I feel like.
It almost feels like they were trying to model the movie and the story kind of off of what, Clint Eastwood brought with Dirty Harry. Because it definitely, you kind of look through it, Eddie Murphy's wearing the same kind of gray suit that, you'd see, Dirty Harry walk around in. So, I don't know. I kind of found that as an interesting, little bit of a nugget in the movie.
And it's just interesting because there's definitely humor in the film, and with Eddie Murphy in there, you know there's going to be humor in the movie, but he's so much more restrained in this film. We haven't gotten to Beverly Hills Cop yet, where he's gone full on over the top in what we think of when we think of Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
And at this point, he's just kind of a very sobered guy who just is along for the ride, and nothing really phases him, with Nick Nolte throwing all these racial slurs at him.
Oh my gosh, so many racial slurs.
Oh my gosh, this was the movie that convinced me that Nick Nolte is a really great actor, and I feel like I've done him an injustice by overlooking him over the past years, because my perception of Nick Nolte is the modern perception of Nick Nolte, with the grumbling, all right, you kids, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, at that same time, that's also something he brought upon himself as well.
Well, exactly. And he does that here, but my gosh, he does a great job of just playing this guy who doesn't give a shit.
Oh, yeah.
And is just there to do his job, and he will step on anybody to get what he wants. And you feel like when he's being racist towards Eddie Murphy, it's not because he's actually racist, it's just because that's the way he treats everybody.
But it was interesting. What I kind of really like about this, and I feel like what this movie did bring to the genre, as the buddy cop genre, is, it's not as funny as we think for a lot of buddy cop movies, but what it shows is the tension that the two characters create for themselves. And that's kind of, in something, what people love about the buddy cop movie, is how these two different kinds of characters really rub off of each other and really either bring the worst or the best out of each other. Towards the end, they bring the best out of each other, and they help each other change their perspectives of the world. But this movie really has it. Like, I remember the scene where Nick Nolte forces Eddie Murphy to fight him in an alleyway. I'm like, oh wow, this gets real.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like a staple of the buddy cop genre is the transition from the the two characters being completely at odds with each other at first, and then as the movie progresses, pretty much uniting as as a singular team to really capture the bad guys or whatever.
Yeah,
and I think 48 Hours is definitely a great example of it.
And I think it's also a testament to what the genre can do, or what films in the genre can do if they really wanted to, because it really is our idea of the buddy cop film, but if you strip out a lot of the humor, and again there is still a lot of humor in there, and it is a very funny movie. It's not really a laugh out loud movie.
Yeah, the bar scene is probably still like a hallmark in just cinema history.
That is a classic scene.
Where Eddie Murphy's just going there and he's just slamming every single redneck in there, and he's like, I have the right to do this, man, so don't you dare tell me what to say.
This is probably the funniest I've seen Eddie Murphy, at least personally for myself. I love the first Beverly Hills Cop, but I think when he's holding himself back, he tends to be funnier than if he goes full Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, just because to be honest, I think his acting's a lot better when he's not trying to showboat it, when he's not really exaggerating his mouth or his facial expressions, when he's just being a character. It's funny to watch.
Yeah. But like I was saying, the interesting thing about cutting out a lot of the humor and putting the focus more on the crime thriller aspect, it shows that you can make a legitimately good movie within this genre without just resorting to jokes and slapstick, as I feel a lot of these films have become.
Mhm.
And in this way, you can show that you can actually tell a story within this structure, because 48 Hours wasn't out to set forward a structure of films to go in the future.
No.
It was just setting out to make a fun action thriller with a lot of grit.
Yeah.
And I feel like it does that really, really well, and it shows that you can actually make a good movie that doesn't need to rely on the jokes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as like you have two solid characters, I feel that are grounded, they're well developed, they're not like, pandering to any kind of a humor, or they're not like some kind of like a side joke or anything like that. If they're two well developed characters, they'll basically carry the whole movie through. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's what makes it work.
Yeah, and you really need each character to be fully developed in and of themselves. You need each character in a buddy cop film to be well fleshed out enough that
Mhm.
you could just make a whole movie just about this character and it would work.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you took Nick Nolte out of the movie and just made a movie about Eddie Murphy's character in this movie, it would be just as interesting as a movie. And the same thing with Nick Nolte's character.
Mhm.
But the fact that you take these two characters who are really well fleshed out, put them together, and you get something really kind of phenomenal. I mean, I wouldn't say this is like an amazing movie, but it's certainly a well-made movie,
Yeah.
and it just shows that you can't skimp on characterizations,
Mhm.
and it's not as simple as just making them opposites. You have to make them opposites that are kind of put together, but they're still interesting characters individually.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think honestly, like we were talking about the characters, and I think those are the characters themselves are the most important part of the buddy cop movie, rather than it's more so than the story itself, because you can have fantastic characters, that play off each other really well and just do incredible work, but you can set them in just like a really basic, plot line, and they could, it could still be a great movie. It doesn't have to be something incredibly complex. It doesn't have to be full of, twists and turns and whatnot. But it can just be a really basic plot and story.
Mhm.
But when you add those characters in, that's what really can make it great.
I mean, it kind of makes me think of. I don't want to bring Family Guy into this, and I'll be pretty short on this. But there's this one episode where Brian the dog and Stewie Griffin are locked in a bank, and it's just a half an hour of them in a bank, but it's still a very entertaining episode. It's actually a very well written episode, but it's because those two characters are so dynamic and they're so opposite to each other, and they're so well fleshed out that heck, they can talk about anything in that. They can basically throw any kind of scenario in that one holding cell, and it'll just be great to watch. Just because you want to see how the characters react. You want to see how far they'll be pushed to the limit, which I feel is what 48 Hours kind of did. It took that concept and it wanted to push it all the way with the whole, crime detective thriller.
I completely agree.
Yeah, that's a good example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's been about a week since I've actually watched 48 Hours, and I honestly can't remember a whole lot about the specifics about the story itself, but I remember individual scenes, and I remember the characters, and I remember their arcs.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't for the life of me tell you what the whole plot was right now. I remember there was a car with a bunch of cash in it, and they needed to find it, and they're trying to take people down, and Mike from Breaking Bad was in it.
That's right, he was. I forgot about that. Oh, that was a shocker when I saw that movie again. I was like, oh, hey, he's from there.
I feel like he keeps popping up and stuff, where I'm just like, hey, there he is. There's Mike. He was working back then.
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Well, let's move on then. So we have 48 Hours, which is known as the father of the 80s buddy cop film, and then you move up. You have a few more movies since then, and then you have Lethal Weapon, which is the Shane Black movie we're going to be talking about today.
It is the best Shane Black movie, in my opinion.
I think when
It's
people
fantastic.
think about buddy cop films, I think Lethal Weapon is the first one that jumps to their mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's kind of the epitome of this genre. It fits all the hallmarks that you need. The opposites attract. You need the action. You need the humor. It balances the drama with the humor really well. And I feel like since then, buddy cop films have become something very different, and it itself is certainly a very different movie from 48 Hours.
Hmm.
But what makes this the quintessential buddy cop film?
Um, I think if anything, it kind of goes back to the whole idea of that they're both opposites. Opposites attract, and opposites create tension for each other. You look at Danny Glover's character. He's the veteran cop, and he knows kind of like he does everything the proper way. And then you have Mel Gibson, who is a loose cannon throughout the whole thing. You have no idea what he's going to do. He gets the job done, but oh my gosh, the lengths he will go to do something, to actually get the job done, it makes you nervous sometimes. Like my favorite scene from it is actually still the when he saves the suicide guy from the building, and his solution is, yeah, we're both going to jump. Because he built it up like he really wants to jump. All right, well, we're going to jump. I'm going to handcuff him to me, and we're going to jump. But all this time, you forget they had set up the safety air trampoline, and they don't get hurt. But still, it's like, I think just Mel Gibson's character alone it's clear that he is so unorthodox in how he gets the job done. I mean, he's passionate about getting the job done, but just I think how that plays off of Danny Glover. Danny Glover can't take it. He's with a psycho and a guy who will just like basically he's almost like a wild dog. It's like I got paired up with a crazy maniacal dog who's going to basically put me through the ringer in this one. But I think in a way that's kind of what brings the humor out of it, but also brings just the internal tension of those two. And for some reason, both of them just being motivated to get the job done, like neither of them has like another objective. I think with 48 Hours, Eddie Murphy's objective was, man, I just want to get out of prison, whatever it takes. If I have to take up with Nick Nolte's, racial slurs, whatever, I'll deal with it. Nick Nolte just has the motivation of, I want to get the job done. In Lethal Weapon, they're both detectives. They both are working together. They both have they don't have the same kind of like working methods, but they both want to get the job done, which is to solve the crime. And
Yeah,
I
they're
feel
really
like
coming at it like from two different angles. I mean, like you said, one's by the books, the other's just an incredible loose cannon.
yeah,
But go ahead, continue.
yeah, but I feel like that's what made this one like just what perfected the buddy cop genre, is to show that they're both detectives, that they both want to solve the crime, and how they both need each other to get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like we were talking about with 48 Hours, where that film just works as a film separate from the comedy. This one, it's a very, very funny movie, but they pull a lot of the humor from the serious elements. For instance, Mel Gibson plays a suicidally depressed maniac, and that is not a funny thing, but the movie finds humor in that. While at the same time treating it like a real serious problem for his character in the movie. And Danny Glover he loves his family. He's worried about his family. He doesn't want anything to happen to them. But they still find humor in the way he treats his family and he interacts with them. And then when they're together out in the field, both of their serious sides kind of clash to make a lot of this humor happen. And this is a movie that I would feel just as comfortable putting on the comedy section of my shelf as well as the thriller section of my shelf.
Oh yeah,
because it works equally as both.
48 Hours was not really a bit more, but quite a lot more like gritty and a lot darker than Lethal Weapon was. Lethal Weapon definitely had a much more comedic side. Like that element was played off more than it was in 48 Hours. And I think the balance between the humor and the kind of the grittiness of the films, I think that's something that Lethal Weapon really kind of perfected and really got incredibly right. So I believe that's why it's one of the, or if not the best buddy cop movie that we've had in the genre.
I totally agree with you, Alex.
All right.
Yeah, and again, just like with 48 Hours, both the characters of Mel Gibson and Danny Glover, they work perfectly separate from each other. Unlike 48 Hours, 48 Hours is is a great movie,
Yeah.
and watching it, you don't really know whether or not the characters are going to reach their objective or if they're going to get through this because the movie is gritty enough that you don't know what's going to happen. Whereas with Lethal Weapon, it gets kind of dark and violent at times, but it's fun enough and it's light enough that you can kind of just put it on during the day and enjoy it. And you know, all right, this is a sort of movie where the characters are going to get through. Okay, they might not be unscathed, but everything's going to be okay in the end, and that's okay for what I want to watch right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of an odd thing. Like, I mean, normally you'd want movies where, you know, there is a bit of mystery. You're not sure if they're going to make it out all right. That creates a lot of the tension. But with Lethal Weapon, the way it's kind of like set up is just like, you know, they're going to be fine in the end. Like, they're not going to be, you know, things are going to go wrong, of course, but it's not going to end like terribly. It's not going to end horribly wrong. So I really like that aspect about it. It kind of makes it it makes it way more fun to watch. Like you're saying, you can just put it on in the middle of the day and not have to like sit there, like trying to endure all the suspense and tension it creates.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's comfortable. I mean, again, if Nick Nolte or Eddie Murphy got killed off in 48 hours, that wouldn't be terribly unexpected for me. If Mel Gibson or Danny Glover got killed off in Lethal Weapon, I feel like that would come as a surprise. And I kind of be like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. I like that character.
Yeah.
Actually, one thing I want to actually comment on, and this is something I just realized with 48 Hours. In 48 Hours, in both movies, they kind of start off not really liking each other. They have a hard time getting warmed up to each other. But in 48 Hours, it felt like Nick Nolte at a lot of times kind of almost shoved Eddie Murphy to the side, where he's like, you know, kid, I don't care if you get shot. I'm not going to save your butt. And it kind of had that impression throughout the whole thing. You know, no matter what Nick Nolte does, no matter what Eddie Murphy does or what happens to them, they're kind of, you know, they're not going to get each other's back. Even like in the bar scene, you know, that's all Eddie Murphy doing that. Nick Nolte's just like, whatever, this kid's doing whatever he wants. Whereas in Lethal Weapon, I think the best example I want to put this is actually right after this, the attempted suicide scene, where Danny Glover brings Mel Gibson into the shop, and he's like, "Why the heck did you do that?" And you know, Mel Gibson's confessing right there, because every day I want to kill myself. And Danny Glover pressures him, like, "Oh, you want to kill yourself? Well, pull the trigger right now." And you have like this standoff with each other, but just before like Mel Gibson actually pulls the trigger, Danny Glover's thumb actually goes right underneath the hammer, and it stops it. And what I just realized with that, and what makes that movie work so well, is no matter what happens, both of each other got each other's back. It's kind of like their survival depends upon each other.
That's a very good point, actually, because 48 Hours, much fun, quote unquote fun as it is a very cynical movie with a very cynical worldview. Whereas Lethal Weapon is a lot more open to the idea of these two people hate each other, but they still will take a bullet for each other.
Mm-hmm. And how much each other's survival depends upon the other person. And I think that's what makes it the best example of a buddy cop genre, is that it kind of gets this idea of like they are two in the same one. There's no individualism in it. They really do depend on each other to survive through this.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. And of course it's a very very 80s movie. I love the music in Lethal Weapon.
Oh man.
So iconic. And it's full of that Shane Black banter that you've come to expect from the Lethal Weapon movies, I guess now. That same kind of humor. In fact, I would say that 48 Hours set the stage for the buddy cop films, and Lethal Weapon showed you, okay, this is what you can do with the potential of this genre. This is the kind of tone you can strike. You can have a film like this, which is very jokey, very funny, but at the same time is very intense and is very well written.
Mm-hmm.
Also.
And most importantly, always have to set it around Christmas.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
It's not a buddy cop movie unless it's during Christmas.
Not a Shane Black movie unless it's Christmas.
Can we just comment on how much of a tragedy it is that Die Hard is considered a Christmas classic, yet Lethal Weapon has been completely sidelined in that department?
Oh, not even Lethal Weapon. Iron Man 3, man. Iron Man 3 takes place during Christmas.
Well, Iron Man 3 does also, but but I'm just saying that I'm surprised that Lethal Weapon hasn't become like a Christmas staple like Die Hard has.
True. I mean, you have the wonderful introduction to Mel Gibson in the Christmas tree lot. You know, I want to go buy a Christmas tree after that, after seeing him take down a bunch of coke fiends. You know.
I love to think that every Christmas tree lot you go to is secretly a drug selling organization ring.
That's right. They're really burning the bush in there.
Wow.
That's right. I just made a drug joke.
Before we move on to Rush Hour, which is going to be the third and final movie we're going to focus on, I'd like to point out one thing about Lethal Weapon, just kind of highlight how good of a movie and how well written of a movie this thing actually is, because I think a lot of people overlook Lethal Weapon as a seriously well done movie. And the scene I want to highlight is the introduction of our main characters, which I think is really interesting. I hadn't noticed this before in previous viewings, but you're introduced to both of them in their most vulnerable state, naked. But the way you're introduced to them it tells you everything you need to know about the characters with very little dialogue. You're introduced to Danny Glover enjoying a bath, and then his family comes in with birthday cake. Kind of a weird scene, but stylistically and from a character standpoint, it tells you everything you need to know about this guy. He's comfortable. He's living a life. He's in his most vulnerable state right then, and he's got a family that loves him. Then you go to Mel Gibson, wakes up hungover, naked in a trailer, peeing into a trash can. And just with that, you know everything you need to know about these characters without a real line of exposition.
Even kind of like still kind of going off of that, the one scene I think still is really hard to watch for me is when Mel Gibson is really contemplating on ending his life with the bullet and the gun. Right after I think he does the job, and he's watching that Bugs Bunny Christmas cartoon, and just that scene it's still very vulnerable. It's still
that scene goes south so fast, and it takes a hard left turn, and you know where it's going, but you don't want it to go there, and then it does, and it's just amazing how they turn this this guy watching cartoons into the most insightful look into what's going on in his head ever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of like where it's really first introduced how he is grieving for the loss of his wife. And it's just, that's another layer of his exposition, which, is not really verbally explained. It's shown, but my gosh, it really goes there.
Yeah, but Lethal Weapon is a very funny movie, but it's not afraid to get very real with the issues these characters are working through. And again, I think it's just a very well-crafted movie. I think a lot of people overlook it when they think of great action films of all time. I think Lethal Weapon should absolutely be in the conversation.
Yeah.
I agree.
So, finally, moving on to our last movie about buddy cop films. So, we're going to talk about Rush Hour now, which I think Rush Hour is the point when we went from buddy cop films being a genre to buddy cop films just kind of being a spoof of themselves. And I think films since Rush Hour know that, okay, this is a staple of action films. We're just gonna have fun with it, because there is nothing serious about Rush Hour at all.
I don't know. I think the whole just kind of going into the plot of Rush Hour, when Jackie Chan is trying to save this little girl from being abducted, and trying to bring her back to her father, there is some tension in that. There's that that connection with the characters, and we want to see them succeed, and we're worried for her life because these guys are they're crime bosses, and we have no idea what they may do to her just to get what they want. So that there is a bit of seriousness in there, but you're right. Overall, it is just kind of a comedy. It's an action comedy.
Oh yeah, well then also any movie can strap a bomb to a little girl and all of a sudden it gets really serious.
Yeah,
of course.
But the interesting thing about Rush Hour is that this was the first film, and maybe it's because I've been watching these buddy cop films for the past week, but Rush Hour is the first one where I felt like they're just making a buddy cop movie just to make it a buddy cop movie, like saying like, okay, we got Jackie Chan, Chris Tucker, One is a Chinese guy that knows kung fu. One is a black cop from the streets of where does this one take place? L.A.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, what happens when we put them together? One is serious, one is more jokey, one is by the books, one isn't, and it felt like they were taking notes out of a rule book or checking down boxes of, all right, so this is the formula for a buddy cop film. Let's go ahead and put it together, which was very interesting. It felt the most Hollywoody of these three movies, and I feel like a lot of buddy cop films from ever since then kind of owe their tone to Rush Hour.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. From what I kind of saw it, I kind of was thinking to myself, it was almost like it was an experiment, just to see, where could we take the buddy cop genre even further. Now, I'll admit, Jackie Chan's, martial art movies, there is a bit of humor, even in just like the action sequences themselves. There's a certain pacing to it that I think is something that I think they really wanted to bring to this. Because I think, yeah, Joe, you're right. They kind of saw, probably what Rush Hour did. Sorry, not what Rush Hour, what Lethal Weapon did with it and bringing humor to the genre. And they wanted to kind of further go it. And even before this, there was other movies that were trying to, kind of make it more of a gimmick and actually bring humor into it. But I think it was a combination of, bringing Jackie Chan's style of humor with his martial art technique, with, Chris Tucker kind of, bringing comic relief to it and seeing how it paired up, and it does feel very Hollywoodish. But
yeah,
it works somehow.
I'm actually a very big Jackie Chan fan, and watching Rush Hour was really interesting to me. I'd actually never seen Rush Hour all the way through until now. I'd seen scenes from it, but I'd never seen the entire film from beginning to end. But being a very big Jackie Chan movie, and I've watched a lot of his Chinese movies, I think the guy is so endearing. He is hilarious. His fighting style works perfectly with his personality. The guy just loves to have fun, and he said, all right, yeah, I'll jump out this 3-story building. I don't give a shit.
I'll break my spine and my leg and even like my kidneys.
I love how if you've ever watched a Chinese Jackie Chan movie, the end credits always show the stunts where he gets most injured, and they always show if he had to go to the hospital at some point during the movie, they put that in the end credits in their quote unquote blooper reel.
Jeez.
The only blooper reel where they show the main actor like breaks an arm.
Well, Joe, it goes back to the actual formula of comedy that it's only funny when someone gets hurt, then it's hilarious.
But the person's not really supposed to get hurt.
Well, I know, but that's what makes it then hilarious. Because that. Yeah.
Going back to Rush Hour, though, watching Rush Hour and being a Jackie Chan fan, he is severely underused in this movie. I mean, as far like Jackie Chan knows his shit. Like he really knows his kung fu, and he knows how to use props really well. And he gets a few scenes where he gets to showcase that. But I feel like the movie was too focused on trying to give a balance between Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan. Yeah. And just for the record, I find Chris Tucker to be pretty insufferable in almost anything I'd say. I only seen him in like 2 movies, and that was this and The Fifth Element, and I didn't like him in either one of these. But I think they used him to the best of his abilities in this film. Just being a big Jackie Chan fan and not being a Chris Tucker fan, I was just a little annoyed when they kept having to balance between the two because I wanted more Jackie Chan.
Yeah.
But that's just me. That's not something against the film. That's just me personally.
No, and to be honest, it feels like what that movie was trying to do is to try and more Americanize a lot more of a Jackie Chan movie than what they had been done before. I mean, they made other movies with Jackie Chan in America, but I think this was one that they really wanted to be a commercial success. So
Yeah, I also find it really interesting that they made Jackie Chan the straight man in this movie because every buddy cop movie, and we haven't really talked about this yet. So I'm going to bring this up now. If every buddy cop film has kind of the goofy guy and then it has the straight man, the guy who wants to do things by the books, but he's not afraid to break down a few doors if he needs to. He's the tough, grim guy. And then you got the comic relief guy who's kind of the fast-talking, jokey guy who will pull the gun in the middle of a ring of bad guys, and he just telling jokes to them and everything. Yeah. So in 48 Hours, you had Eddie Murphy was the comic relief, Nick Nolte was the serious guy, Lethal Weapon, Danny Glover was the serious guy, and Mel Gibson was the jokey guy.
Mhm.
in Lethal Weapon or in Rush Hour,
Mhm.
Chris Tucker is the jokey guy, but Jackie Chan is the comic relief, which is interesting. Okay, sorry, Jackie Chan is the serious guy, which is interesting because Jackie Chan has been known as playing the comic.
Yeah.
He's always the slapstick guy who gets hit around in all of his movies, and
Mhm.
here he's playing the quiet, serious cop who's not afraid to get a little light here and there. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but this film more than the other two, I feel like really tried to uh, drive these two apart character wise as much as they could to make it more funny when they came together.
Yeah. And that's kind of like I feel like that's the almost kind of like in a lab if you're to do an experiment with all these different buddy cop chemicals and genres. It feels like this is the genre or the movie that kind of went a little sour with its experimentation. Just because going back to what we talked about, the buddy cop is supposed to bring out the best in each character, and each character is supposed to play off each other very well. In this, it felt more like a gimmick, and it felt like a gimmick all the way through.
Yeah, that I talked a little bit earlier on like the balance between the humorous or the comedic side of buddy cop movies and like the more serious, grittier side. And Rush Hour definitely fell more on like it's a comedy rather than kind of having the balance between the two. It definitely has more of the comedic aspect of it. Because I mean, Chris Tucker's kind of his comedy, his humor is a bit overpowering when it comes to playing off of like Jackie Chan's serious and like Jackie Chan's more like a comedic he can have a comedic personality, and more serious kind of straight by the books role. I don't think it worked as well as other characters in the previous films we've talked about. It's definitely more comedic than anything else.
Yeah, well, I think more than the other two movies, their sensibilities or their characters feel a lot more forced. For instance, Chris Tucker feels like he has to be the funny guy in this one. He's joking around because this movie needs that, and then Jackie Chan is being serious, and he's being the guy who knows kung fu and the quiet guy because because the movie needs him to be that. Whereas a movie like Lethal Weapon, the Danny Glover and Mel Gibson were just naturally those characters. Their personalities were explained by what defined them, by the events around them, how they've been molded up until that point, their family lives. Whereas in Rush Hour, it's just kind of like Chris Tucker is funny because he needs to be funny. Jackie Chan is serious because we need him to be serious. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as funny when we put these two together. So it's much lighter. 48 Hours is a very cynical movie in this genre. Rush Hour is the least cynical movie of all time, and I feel like I'm being really hard on Rush Hour. I enjoy Rush Hour. I'm not the biggest fan, but it's the sort of movie where I watch it and I'm like, it's a very light little pop movie that I can kind of throw on. It tries to get a little real with, again, you can strap a bomb to a little girl and all of a sudden your movie will get serious. But the movie never felt like anyone was ever in any real danger. I haven't seen the sequels. I presume it gets even more like that as they go on, though.
Yeah. I can't really say anything good about the sequels. Just only that I'm kind of glad that Jackie Chan's gone back to doing some really good really good Chinese epic films. Like I've seen the Forbidden Kingdom, and to be honest, I loved him in that.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of up his alley.
Anyway, I think that wraps it up for talking about those three movies. Again, 48 Hours. The genre has really turned more into a comedy as the years gone by. Whereas in 48 Hours, he started off not a comedy at all.
Yeah.
I mean that it's a very gritty crime thriller with comedic elements. And then as the years go on, the buddy cop comedy genre has become the buddy cop comedy genre. Like it started off just the buddy cop films, now it's buddy cop comedies. And I guess just to wrap up, just throw out a few examples of films since Rush Hour. I think one of one of the biggest examples of the buddy cop films we've seen since then. We had Bad Boys and Hot Fuzz, which were both out and out comedies. I love both of those films. I think for what they've done, I think they're much better done than Rush Hour. But I think they took the Rush Hour sensibility and did something different with it and made them well written. Because Rush Hour is just kind of like, oh, okay, we put together this formula, and it's funny. Whereas a movie like Hot Fuzz, I think, says, all right, we take this formula that's already known as being a funny formula, and we're going to do something different with it. And Bad Boys is just exploitational.
Yeah, Hot Fuzz is like very self-aware too. I mean, they're watching Bad Boys in the movie, so
yes,
it's what it's doing. I think that's a great aspect of it, honestly. But I love Hot Fuzz. It's so great. It balances the action, the comedy. There's not really a gritty aspect to it much at all. It's a bit more lighthearted, but I think it works really well for the story, the characters, the way the characters play off of it, and just kind of the whole deal.
Yeah, I mean, one example actually of a recent buddy cop film that I think actually does the genre very well, and it's surprising that it's a Disney movie, Zootopia. I kind of went into it not thinking it was going to be a buddy cop film, even though one of the characters is a cop, very clearly in the very beginning. But it kind of goes back to the actual good formula of a good buddy cop movie, where you have two distinct characters. Each of them have a good backstory. They're not a gimmick. They're not pandering to any kind of a comic relief or anything like that. They're just two characters that work really well off of each other. And, you have Judy Hopps and Nick Wilde, who, one's a fox, one's a rabbit, but other than that, the real chemistry comes from the dialogue they have, what each other's motivations are, and them in all of it, they have to solve this crime. And there's a lot of tips of the hat to like other like buddy cop movies throughout the whole movie. So that was a recent movie I saw, and I was like, this is a good example of a buddy cop film.
Awesome. I actually haven't seen Zootopia yet, but I'll probably catch that one when it hits Blu-ray coming up. But I've heard very very good things about that.
Yeah, it was a very good film.
And then that all brings us full circle to The Nice Guys, which if you want to see my review of The Nice Guys, you can find it on filmliterates.com. Again, it's a very very comic movie. It brings the buddy cop genre from what Shane Black did with it in Lethal Weapon, and he ties that in with the modern sensibilities of the buddy cop genre as being a comedy today, but still makes it a very very fun movie, a very fun, well-rounded movie. It's a little bit more jokey than Lethal Weapon. It's more of a parody of the genre, but I think it still works on its own really well.
And at the same time, it's also a little bit more graphic than I think what Lethal Weapon was, and kind of just the subject it talks about. So go in with caution. Realize it's gonna go places.
It's about a couple of scumbag detectives scumming through the underbelly of the porn industry, as I said in my review.
Yes. And I love there's a joke towards the second half of the film when they find this missing girl that really kind of it brings a little joke about just movies in general, and like I said, when you guys go and see it, you'll be able to catch it.
Gotcha.
Anyway, if you're watching this on YouTube, tell us in the comments, what are some examples of buddy cop films that you like that we've left out? Obviously, we haven't had a chance to talk about all of them, and there are quite a few out there. And is there anything we missed as far as the genre goes? You can find us on Google Play Music, and you can find us on iTunes if you search Film Illiterates or the Film Illiterates podcast. And for, again, my review of The Nice Guys is on our YouTube channel as well as filmilliterates.com. And we'll be back within the next week or so, I guess, with another podcast. And yeah, that's all I got. You guys got anything?
No, it was just good chatting with you guys.
Awesome. And again, find us on filmilliterates.com, Facebook, you can search just Film Illiterates, and Twitter at Film Illiterates. We'll be posting new videos, reviews, all movie talk up there as it comes out. So keep it easy. Keep it easy. That's not a thing. Keep it. I don't know what I'm saying.